Here's the story.
All right. Hey, everybody. Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. We got a lot to get to tonight. We're going to answer a question about Antifa, so I'm already looking forward to how my mentions are going to look on Twitter. Be nice in the emails. Send some questions, though. You know what? Send whatever you want. I got thick skin. You can email The Story at kgw.com. You can chat with me on Facebook. Pick up your phone, tweet us using the hashtag HeyDan. Now, we're going to kick off tonight's show with the latest edition of Were There Clashes Between Protesters and Police Last Night? Bring up the font. No, things have kind of evened out again. But we will say there were demonstrations last night, and one of them had a message.
I am an angry mother that is looking and demanding justice. If I go out, it will be justice for Patrick Kimmons.
So that was during a protest last night in downtown Portland, a peaceful one. I mean, the kind of people in my inbox tell me I never talk about. The woman who you just heard from there is Letha Winston. She's the mother of this man, the one she mentioned, Patrick Kimmons, a 27-year-old black man who was shot and killed 2 years ago yesterday in a downtown Portland parking lot. Last night's protest was in his memory. The two officers who fired those shots in 2018 testified that Kimmons had shot two people during a fight and then pointed the gun at officers before they shot him 9 times. Kimmons' mom says his death and the fact that the grand jury did rule that the officers were justified in killing him is an example of the racism in our justice system. The same racism at the center of Portland's protests, which have gone on for more than 100 days. And what we have seen in a lot of cases is that regardless of the details of that night or what the grand jury decided or if the police were justified or not, people will use moments like that, like last night, to discuss racism in our justice system. But it's easy for that message, the important message, to get lost when peaceful protests get drowned out by this chaotic violence like we have seen time and time again over the past few months. And as we saw during the presidential debate, Portland's summer of protests is going to play heavily in the presidential election. But if you've been watching our show, you already know that the federal government wanted to crack down hard on protesters for a while now. And tonight, we may know the lengths that they possibly could have gone to. And that brings us to our big story. When the protests hit their peak, the Department of Homeland Security was incredibly visible in our city. I mean, they had the agents in the streets, they were guarding the federal buildings, they were detaining people in unmarked minivans and going viral for doing so. But according to one report, they were possibly also working invisibly. The website The Nation reported last month that while DHS was on the ground, they were also tapping the phones of protesters without approval from a judge. And not just the protesters who were lighting the fires, but the peaceful ones, holding signs and chanting long before sundown.
4 Oregon lawmakers sent a letter to DHS asking for classified documents to be released after accusations that agents illegally spied on protesters in Portland by tapping their cell phones, tracking their movements, and listening to their calls. It broke in a story by The Nation and reporter Ken Klippenstein.
Within DHS right now, there's a lot of anxiety over what was done to demonstrators' phone communications. And what I was told is that there were intercepted not just the metadata of it, that is, who is speaking to whom, but also the contents of those calls in order to map out a hierarchy, which again presupposes that there is a hierarchy. I think you're right. That's something that you want to try to find out. But, what the folks told me is, if we want to try to find a hierarchy, and they're saying, let's do this the right way. So, when we collect these things, we're able to, present it in front of a court of law or whatever it may be, which you can't do if you've gone around the formal channel.
The people who are your sources are former agents with these departments, intelligence officers who you describe as familiar with the matter. Can you explain how someone who is a former person with these would have knowledge of things that are currently happening within something that's considered a very, high security intelligence operation where leaks are just that, things that aren't supposed to be happening?
Well, when you have a former official, as I note in the story, that doesn't mean that, they've been former for a very long time. In the case of one of those two sources, they worked under Brian Murphy, the Undersecretary of Intelligence for Department of Homeland Security. And so in many cases, they can have, very recent insight. And in addition to that, just because they've left one department doesn't mean that they're not still, people with security clearances and in the intelligence community, in which case all of these components, very often will work together with each other, share information.
If you're wondering why you recognize the name Brian Murphy as one of his source's former bosses, it's because he's the former DHS agent who was demoted before filing a whistleblower complaint where he said officials were telling him not to file reports on Russia or white supremacy.
I don't want to make this too partisan. I mean, a lot of these problems predate the present administration, but in certain respects, it's intensified since then. So, for example, there have been analysts out of Department of Homeland Security saying that they've had problems tracking far-right extremist groups, white supremacist groups prior to the Trump administration, but their difficulties, it seems, have only grown in recent years. And all this came to a head in the deployment to Portland of a lot of DHS assets along with Justice Department assets to respond to the civil unrest there. And the impression I'm getting from people on the inside is that there's anxiety about if Congress ends up investigating this and subpoenaing people, where are people going to fall? They're not actually taking issue with the concept of intercepting phone calls and signals intelligence, as it's called in the intelligence world. They're not taking issue with that in itself. They're taking issue with that they don't feel as though there was the appropriate legal justification to do so.
Now, DHS has not commented about these accusations. I asked Multnomah County DA Mike Schmidt what he thought about the claims, and he called them disturbing, but also said that we should wait and see the documentation that emerges after lawmakers apply some pressure. Unfortunately, there is no timeline for when that might happen. A viewer named Dennis wanted to pass along a compliment on some recent KGW coverage. He emailed, "Great job on the history of the Proud Boys. Have you ever done the same on Antifa?" Dennis, thanks for the question. Now, we have done some similar types of stories on Antifa, like how members of the Timbers Army, for instance, fought to wave flags with Antifa symbols, but we haven't done a big deep dive into their history. Well, not until now.
You have probably heard the term Antifa a lot lately.
Antifa.
Antifa. Antifa.
President Trump recently tweeted that he is designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. But what is Antifa? Who is in it? And why is the spotlight back on the group when it's been in existence for decades? Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist, is a loosely connected series of groups with shared left or extreme left ideology. They have no central governing body, no defined roles, and because of their self-admitted secrecy, it is hard to know how many people count themselves as members. Antifa supporters generally campaign, organize, and protest, sometimes violently, against actions, people, and organizations they view as promoting authoritarian, racist, homophobic, or xenophobic beliefs. Anti-fascist groups can be traced back to Europe during World War II, where grassroots, mostly underground resistance movements, fought to gain control of the continent back from Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. The modern Antifa movement gained international attention in 2011 during Occupy Wall Street, again 2 years later when they affiliated themselves with Black Lives Matter, and for counter-demonstrations at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Some Antifa groups are known for their community outreach and organizing, while others deploy often militant and radical tactics to get their message across. And without a real hierarchy or structure, Antifa is not so much an organization as a loose confederation of people with a similar ideology.
Now, it's easy to assume that Antifa and other left-wing activists would only target right-wing groups like the Proud Boys or Trump supporters, but Mayor Wheeler would beg to differ, and I think so would his neighbors. Yeah, this summer, his condo in the Pearl kind of became a hot spot of Black Lives Matter and other left-wing protests. Some more violent protesters, they even broke windows. People tried to set fires in this man's lobby. Think about that. Now, after those protests, Wheeler announced that he's going to go ahead and move out of that building. Probably a good idea. But between that, being bullied by President Trump on the debate stage, and being tear-gassed by federal troops this summer, it actually got worse for the mayor just this week. First, one of his closest allies in City Hall, City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, says she is no longer endorsing his re-election campaign. She told the Oregonian Wheeler has, quote, failed miserably at police accountability. Second, Wheeler's in some serious money trouble. His challenger, Sarah Iannarone, has more than $211,000 in the bank, while a few weeks ago, Wheeler only had $19,000. That is until he gave himself a $150,000 loan last month. We know this because it's public information. information on the Oregon Secretary of State's website. We also know that Portland's city charter only allows candidates or candidate committees to carry a maximum loan balance of $5,000. The Ayanna Roan campaign jumped all over this. Her campaign called Wheeler's loan to himself flagrantly illegal and accused Wheeler of trying to, quote, buy this election with his inheritance. Wheeler has had several campaign finance violations this past summer, but this time the Portland Auditor's Office let him off the hook. See, the office told us that they're not going to enforce that $5,000 rule here because Wheeler gave the loan to himself. And they pointed to some old Supreme Court decisions that have allowed that sort of thing in the past. So, for now, Ted Wheeler is campaigning almost entirely on his own dime, with former allies now turning against him. You know what this sounds like? The perfect time for a debate. KGW and the Oregonian are hosting Mayor Wheeler and Sarah Ayanna Roan in the first Portland mayoral debate a week from today on October 8th. And we don't want to do all the questioning ourselves. That's a lot of work. We need your help for that. So we want you to send us video questions for both candidates. Use your phone video camera, record yourself asking a question. Try to keep it brief. I know 10 to 15 seconds isn't a lot of time, but try and condense your message there. Make sure that you're recording this in a quiet and well-lit place. Please don't forget to say your name and tell us the neighborhood where you live. When you're done, you can email those to us at thestory@kgw.com. You can tweet it to us using the hashtag HeyDan, or just go ahead and send it to me on Facebook. And let's just cross our fingers and hope that that debate doesn't turn out looking like this one.
And we did a great thing by shutting it down. Wait a minute, Joe. Let me shut you down for a second, Joe, just for 1 second.
Oh, give me a break.
Because you know what? There's nothing smart about you, Joe. 47 years you've done nothing.
Let's have this debate. By the way, maybe you could inject some bleach in your arm, and that would take care of it. This is the same man.
That was said sarcastically, and you know that.
I
would have said sarcastically.
So here's
I'm not over it. I'm not over that yet. Are you annoyed by it? I'm going to keep playing it. Sorry. You know what? We do bring it up a lot, though, because Portland was mentioned, which is a big deal because, you know, the last time Portland actually came up in a presidential debate was 40 years ago on October 18th, 1980. The candidates were President Jimmy Carter and California Governor Ronald Reagan. One of the questioners was this man, William Hilliard, who at the time was the assistant managing editor of the Portland Oregonian. And as if time doesn't already feel enough like a flat circle, why don't we go ahead and look at the KGW vault to hear the first question that he asked.
The decline of our cities has been hastened by the continual rise in crime, strained race relations, the fall in the quality of public education, the persistence of abnormal poverty in a rich nation, and a decline in the services to the public. The signs seem to point toward a deterioration that could lead to the establishment of a permanent underclass in the cities. What specifically would you do in the next 4 years to reverse this trend?
After that question, they just yelled at each other for 5 minutes. No, they didn't. In all seriousness, looking back through moments in history is a great way to put times like these that we're living in now into perspective. The day after this most recent debate here, our Sunrise team talked to a political scientist from Pacific University, and he reminded us that American history does in fact go back a lot longer than TV debates.
In television, we've never seen it for a televised debate. But if we go back to the 1800s, this was the norm for debates for people running for national office. That rough and tumble name-calling Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas kind of thing, that was what happened. And people responded to it, they cast their votes, and the country moved on. The country was able to survive it, and in some cases thrive because of it. So what we're seeing is something we're not used to, but it is a form of democracy. It's a rougher form, but it's a form of getting it out there. And, you know, be happy that we have a democracy where this can happen. We have the freedom to hear these people, and they have the freedom to express themselves, even if they don't do it very well.
And Dr. Moore brought up a debate there that some of our viewers actually wrote in and brought up too, and that's that Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas debate. By the way, things were going on just great in the country at the time. It was another time in American history where the United States was bitterly divided, much worse than now. I'll go ahead and say that, considering black Americans were enslaved at the time. We went to war over that, and Americans killed each other to the toll of 600,000 people, which still is the most in any single event in American history. We can still hear honestly the echoes of that bloody conflict in the cries for justice that we hear now from Black Lives Matter protesters, and in the ugly racist chants of white supremacists determined to prevent that justice from coming to fruition. It reminds me of a quote by the late broadcaster Paul Harvey, who lived through his fair share of crazy moments in history. And he said, "In times like these, it's helpful to remember that there have always been times like these."
When the story continued. When I pressed Oregon Republican Senate candidate Jo Rae Perkins about her beliefs in the QAnon conspiracy, she told me this.
If we're not going to discuss the issues, then I will end this interview.
So I asked about the issues, and Senator Merkley too. As you can imagine, they're on the opposite side of pretty much everything.
Welcome back to The Story. I know your phone's nearby. It's probably on you right now. You probably have it in your hand. If you do, send us a message to one of the places you see on your screen. I think you'll have a lot to say, maybe, during this next segment. So last night on The Story, we introduced you to Oregon's Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, Jo Rae Perkins. She's not expected to unseat Senator Jeff Merkley. She's a real long shot, but she's getting a lot of attention for being a supporter of the conspiracy theory QAnon. We explained what that is last night, so if you missed that, you can check it out on the KGW YouTube page. It's on my Facebook page as well. I asked her a lot about QAnon, but eventually she told me this.
And if we're not going to discuss the issues, then I will end this interview.
Fair enough. All right, so I did ask her about the issues, the pandemic, racial justice, the wildfires, that kind of stuff. I also asked Senator Jeff Merkley about those as well. Now, before we air my conversations, I need to say that Perkins did make a lot of untrue statements about many of these issues as we talked about them, and we decided not to air those for the most part. For example, when I asked her about her belief that the number of COVID deaths are overinflated, she made a false statement about Herman Cain's death. He died after contracting COVID-19 at President Trump's rally in Tulsa. But I do want to play this portion here because she explains why she's skeptical of the death count.
What I want to know is of those 200,000 people that have died having COVID, how many of them had comorbidities? That's the underlying question.
How many had what?
So, for example, Herman Cain passed away recently, had comorbidities. Herman Cain, he had cancer, it spread to his liver. He acquired COVID-19. What was his life expectancy?
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Did COVID-19 kill him? Or see, those are the questions that, and these are questions that people are asking, and they're legitimate questions. Very legitimate questions. So I just think that people need to question.
Okay, again, that part about Herman Cain is not true. I mean, he did have cancer that spread to his liver 14 years ago, but he beat that cancer and died in July from COVID-19. On the other hand, Senator Merkley has the opposite belief. He thinks that the COVID deaths are actually undercounted.
There's two ways to measure the deaths. One is just the collection of the reporting. When a person dies, the medical professionals say, here's what the person died of. And that's where we've gotten to 200,000. But if you look at the number of deaths and compare it to a normal year, then it's more than 200,000. So there's a lot of deaths that are happening connected to the coronavirus that aren't getting reported as coronavirus. So if anything, in fact, the impact on Americans has been more than the number we hear reported in the daily news.
So I also asked both candidates about racism and police reforms. Here's what Perkins said when I asked her if she believes there is a problem with racism in this country.
Overall, no, especially after talking with people that have immigrated here from other countries. And they tell me that this is the least racist country they've ever been in, that we are, for the most part, we accept people. We're never going to erase bigotry. We're never going to erase people not liking somebody because of the shape of their eyes, the color of their skin. We cannot erase that. That is, for whatever reason, that's just how some people are. Don't know if that's how they were brought up. I don't know. That's not me. I'm not racist. Instead of saying, oh, woe is me, I was born here, oh, woe is me, I'm this color skin, or oh, woe is me, I have this or I don't have that. If it were true, then we would not have the number of successful Black Americans or Asian Americans that we have in this country.
When I asked if she thinks any police reforms are needed, she told me that she believes officers need mental health counseling to deal with the traumas they encounter on the job. Here's what Senator Merkley said about police reforms.
I think what people are looking for is very substantive changes, not just a conversation, but having that conversation lead to a dialogue about saying we need to end procedures that choke off a person's air. We need to end carotid artery holds that cut off blood to the brain. We need to end no-knock warrants where the police bust in on and sometimes get the wrong apartment. And most of all, we need to have the type of training that says to every public safety official, everyone in the community is your client. It's not that the white population are your clients and the community of color are the threat. Everyone is the client. You're there to help everyone and to provide equal protection and safety for everyone.
The last thing I talked to them about was the wildfires. They both agree that we need forest management, just in different ways.
Absolutely. There's data that shows that when we stopped being able to go into the forest and do proper forest management, where the underbrush is reducing the fuel for those fires by letting those fires burn. Oh, it's a natural fire set off by lightning. We'll just let it burn because it's natural. It doesn't make sense to me because we've seen these fires get out of control. Over 1 million acres is now burned in Oregon this year. And there's no reason for that. Those fires should have been put out. Yes, there was some high wind, there's some other circumstances, and we know that there was some arson, but for the most part, a lot of those fires could be put out a lot faster. The cost to fight those fires is way more than what it should, because we should be able to log a lot of that wood.
Well, certainly forest management really does matter. Our second growth forests, so when they're all planted at once, become very fire prone. The trees are very close together. They're so thick that it's hard for firefighters to get through the forest. The canopies are all the same height. So thinning those forests, mowing those forests, and doing prescribed burns on those forests really can make them more resilient. What we keep running into is a blockade from some folks who want to return to the 1950s and do massive clear cuts. I mean, 10,000 acre clear cut after 10,000 acre clear cut without restriction, which a clear cut does stop a fire briefly, but then it quickly regrows into the very same fire trap that we had before. And so clear cuts are not the answer.
We also looked into the campaign finances for this race, and Senator Merkley is definitely winning on that front. He has raised almost $5 million and spent nearly $3 million of that. Perkins has raised close to $37,000, and she spent $31,000 of that. All right, let's talk. Send me some questions, comments, stuff like that. It's interesting, all the important stuff we're talking about on this show, and most of the comments I'm getting tonight are about, we'll talk about them after the break. All right, let's read some comments as we close out here. So we got an email from Brandon. It said the USA didn't go to war, talking about the Civil War, didn't go to war because of slavery. The North went to war with the South because of economics. Yeah, I guess so. The economics over owning black people. So let's lighten it up, though. Look, I'm off tomorrow and Monday, so I'm going to be taking a little long weekend, stepping away. So I do want to end on some light stuff here. I got some emails about the suit tonight. Mike saying, nice suit. Would you fall through an awning? Mike. Another one from Harriet. She said, there's something a little too matchy-matchy with your suit pants. It looks a bit off. You need to lose the pants and put your jeans back on to look together. And then I got this one from Naomi, who just said, cute suit today. People wonder how I can handle some negative comments and kind of keep it all in stride. And it's really easy. I only pay attention to the positive ones. Thank you. Yeah, it is cute. I appreciate the email. That's the story. We'll see you. Yeah, thank you so much, Naomi. It's really nice of you to write that in. Appreciate it.